Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now we're near a spot that was once the primary means of traveling from Los Angeles to the north, and when it was built in the 1850s, it made these impassable mountains passable. After being bypassed in the early 1900s, it then became a very popular filming location, and movies starring actors such as Harry Carey, Buster Keaton, Tom Mix, and John Wayne were all filmed there. But nowadays, despite it being a registered historic landmark, it's been largely forgotten and abandoned. And in fact, the historical markers for it are even long gone. Today, we're visiting Beals Cut. We are currently near Newhall, California, on the Sierra Highway. And I'm sure most people who pass through here are unaware of the history that is just hidden from view. This area is known as Newhall Pass. There were once several monuments and plaques here, including one for Fremont Pass, which was what this area was called before it was called Newhall Pass, but they've been taken and this area is fenced off. I'm not sure how long it's been since the plaques were last here. Apparently every time they've been replaced, they've been stolen again almost immediately, so I guess it's just easier to fence this area off than have any sort of historical information here, which is a real shame. This road used to be part of Highway 6, then California State Route 14. And we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but over here there used to be a tunnel that was opened in 1910 to bypass the older wagon road that we came out here for. In 1938, they removed all the rock above the tunnel to make it a cut rather than a tunnel to allow more traffic through. One of the plaques that used to be out here was the original 1910 dedication plaque for the Newhall Tunnel, but I read somewhere that one was removed by Caltrans before it could be stolen, so at least that one's not lost. But back in the mountains, hidden just out of view, is Beals Cut, which is what we came out here to see today, so let's start heading over. Beals Cut's only about a quarter mile from here, and I was just going to take this path, but it looks pretty sketchy. I think I'll just go ahead and take the longer way, where there's more room to avoid anyone who might be inhabiting the area. We've moved about a mile or so down the road to the parking area for the Ellesmere Canyon open space, and hopefully from here we should be able to reach Beals Cut from the north. That's California State Route 14 to our left. The freeways in this area are quite numerous these days, but before the 1850s, getting to Los Angeles wasn't easy, especially from California's Central Valley. When Europeans first arrived in the Los Angeles area, of course natives were already here, and they had a number of paths over the mountains. So when the Spanish first arrived here, those Indian paths were how they would cross the mountains. One of those trails became El Camino Viejo, or the Old Los Angeles Trail. It was the first real road going north into the interior of Spanish colonial Las Californias, but it took a long time and was very difficult, especially for wagons. Wagons would often need to use a windlass, which is a type of winch to be lowered down parts of the trail. And after the Spanish, that old road was used by Mexico, then the United States. When Fort Tejon was established about 40 miles north of here in 1854, a faster way was needed to get to Los Angeles. So in the summer of 1854, $1,000 was authorized to build a good wagon road through these mountains. Of course, in true road building fashion that has continued on to today, it went over budget, and by November they were trying to raise another $1,000. The first stage went over the new road, which was being called the San Fernando Road, in December 1854. The whole road was constructed in about 4 months. And of course, the most impressive part of that was the place we're heading right now, what was to become known as Beals Cut. We are about to enter the old abandoned Newhall oil refinery. This kind of feels like the start of a horror movie now. I mean, we haven't seen a single other person since we've been out here, but that doesn't really mean we're alone. The hills may have eyes. Let's take a look and see what this thing is over here. Well, at least this graffiti is letting us know we're on the right path. Crude oil was first taken over the pass that was built through here in 1855. It was used for experimental purposes, as there was hope it could be made into something lighter to be used for heating and lamps, but it didn't really pan out. The first successful oil refinery in California opened not too far from here in 1876. This refinery was first opened in 1930 as the Andrews Refinery, and then it became the San Fernando Refinery for a few years, before taking the name Newhall Refinery in 1942, which is what it was called until it closed in 1990. Take a closer look at this tank over here. And God, I hope I don't find a body in here. Okay, no dead bodies, thankfully, but quite a few tires. Ever since this place closed in 1990, there have been numerous proposals about what to do with the property. Everything from a business park to a minor league baseball stadium. But the big holdup is the cleanup. And take a look at the size of this tank over here. We'll definitely have to get a closer look at that. As you can imagine, cleaning up an abandoned oil refinery isn't going to be cheap. This place is pretty big, and the ground here is likely extremely contaminated from years of oil production. I know when the company was in operation, they were fined for excessive sulfur dioxide emissions, so who knows what's in the ground here. Plus you have the historical aspect of an old wagon road going through here, which was very important to the area's history, and that should be protected too. Speaking of the ground being contaminated, it looks like oil is still leaking out onto the ground to this day. Just take a look at this oil slick here, and it seems to be coming from this pipe over here. Take a bit of a closer look. You can see oil just still coming out of there. I believe we're on the old wagon road right now, but I'm not 100% sure on that. It may have traveled closer to where Sierra Highway is, once it went through Beals Cut, but I think it came down the hill here. We are also approaching a hopefully abandoned camper, and I'm not sure how well you can see it, but it looks like you can actually get into that giant tank. I'm not brave enough to go anywhere near it though. I might walk in there and find the Thunderdome. The Butterfield Overland Mail, which was the first transcontinental mail system and was in operation from 1858 to 1861, would have taken this same route heading to and from Los Angeles. We're getting close to Beals Cut, but here's a look back at the refinery and that abandoned camper. It's actually been surprisingly peaceful out here. All throughout this place, the ground is just completely covered in oil. I mean, there is oil everywhere. We can finally see the cut up ahead. I mentioned it being peaceful here, but it's also been slightly unnerving. This area is both remote and heavily populated, so you never know what you might run into out here. But getting back to the history, the contract to build the road was given to two men, W.T.B. Sanford and George Carson. They hired a man named Gabe Allen and a gang of 20 men to cut through San Fernando Mountain here to make this cut. When they were finished, the cut was 30 feet deep. And of course, somehow there's a burnt out old car up here and a bunch of trash. From 1854 to 1910, the majority of people traveling between Los Angeles and Central California would have traveled through here. Now let's travel through the cut ourselves. Of course, back when this was open, traveling through here wouldn't have been free. Before the government was in the business of building roads, having to pay tolls to use a road was not uncommon. The state of California awarded Charles Brindley, Andres Pico, and James Vineyard with a 20-year contract to collect tolls from people traveling through the cut. And you can really see here how this cut was carved by hand. So, how did this become Beals Cut? Well, Andres Pico had fought for Mexico in the Mexican-American War. So when Edward Beale, the same guy who brought camels across the country and established the Beale wagon road from Arkansas to California, was appointed by Abraham Lincoln to be the Federal Surveyor General of California and Nevada, he challenged Pico's loyalty to Lincoln. It worked because in 1863, the rights to collect the tolls in the pass were transferred to Beale. Beale maintained the rights to the pass for the next 20 years, so the cut became known as Beals Cut. While he didn't create it, he did improve it. He used Chinese laborers to deepen the cut from 30 feet to 90 feet, though a lot of that has collapsed back in over the last 100 years, and it's definitely not 90 feet deep now. Aside from the addition of a few transmitters and power lines, this view to the south probably doesn't look much different than it would have in 1854. It's not quite as easy to make out the wagon road south of the cut anymore. After Beals Cut was bypassed by the new tunnel about a quarter mile from here in 1910, this became a very popular filming location, especially for westerns. John Ford, probably the most famous director of westerns, filmed here 4 times. Ford actually redid the same shot in a number of films. Easily the most well-known John Ford movie filmed here was 1939's Stagecoach, the movie that made John Wayne a star. In that movie, there's a scene where Wayne and company are being chased through Monument Valley by Apaches and end up going right through Beals Cut. This is pretty impressive, especially considering it was carved by hand over 150 years ago, but you can see how it's not as deep as it once was. A lot of it collapsed in during the 1990s after strong storms, and then the Northridge earthquake of 1994, which was a 6.7 magnitude quake. The most famous movie appearance for Beals Cut, at least for its time, was in the Tom Mix film 3 Jumps Ahead. In that movie, Tom Mix, who was one of the biggest stars of the silent film era, if not the biggest, he was basically the Dwayne Johnson of the 1920s, jumped over Beals Cut on his horse. Or at least he claimed to have done it. Several stuntmen also claimed to have been the ones to do the jump, but looking at stills from the film, I'm not sure anyone did it. It was probably done with special effects. The film itself is lost, unfortunately, but Tom Mix was in at least 3 movies shot here. A horse jumped the cut in another film called The Devil Horse, starring Harry Carey, but there's no doubt that one is special effects. That movie is on YouTube, and I'll link it in the description, but I can't say I recommend it. Another major silent film star, Buster Keaton, filmed 2 movies here as well, The Paleface in 1922 and 7 Chances in 1925. At least 25 movies were shot at Beals Cut between 1913 and 1947, but since so many silent films are lost, it's impossible to know the true number. It's amazing to think how many people would have traveled through here in its time. And while Beals Cut sits here out of sight, largely forgotten today, it can't be understated how important it was at one time, connecting Los Angeles to the north. So that's our look at Beals Cut, and I guess the Newhall oil refinery. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.